My father stood in front of the jury, wiping a fake tear from his eye, and swore under oath that I had not worked a single day since graduating from Spelman College. He called me a parasite. He told the judge I was a lazy, entitled daughter who stole $5 million from my late mother's trust fund. I sat at the defense table fixing the cuff of my emerald suit and offered him a polite smile. He thought he was sending me to federal prison. He had absolutely no idea that the judge presiding over our case was about to receive a classified envelope from the Pentagon revealing exactly what I had been doing for the last decade. Before I tell you how my own family walked blindly into a federal trap, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever let toxic family members dig their own graves. My name is Naomi. I am 34 years old. Right now, I am sitting in the chillingly quiet courtroom of the United States District Court. The heavy mahogany paneling and the stark fluorescent lights usually make people sweat. But my resting heart rate is a perfectly calm 60 beats per minute. I fold my hands on the polished wooden table in front of me. I do not fidget. I do not cry. I just watch the man who raised me perform the greatest acting job of his entire life. Marcus is 60 years old. In our community, he is considered a pillar of excellence. He owns a massive real estate development firm. He sponsors charity galas. He shakes hands with mayors and pastors. Today, he is playing the role of the heartbroken, grieving widower. He is wearing his best tailored charcoal suit, the one he specifically bought for my mother's funeral just 3 months ago. He grips the edges of the witness stand, letting his shoulders slump just enough to look vulnerable. The 12 members of the jury lean forward, completely captivated by his sorrow. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my father begins, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. I stand before you as a broken man. My beautiful wife Beatrice passed away recently, and while I was mourning the love of my life, my eldest daughter was busy robbing her grave. He points a shaking finger directly at me. The jury members turn their heads in unison, glaring at me with absolute disgust. I maintain my neutral expression. Look at her, my father continues, his voice rising in righteous indignation. Naomi has always been a disappointment to our family name. We gave her everything. We paid her tuition, hoping she would make something of herself, hoping she would embody the excellence our family stands for. But she has not worked a single legitimate day since she walked across that graduation stage over a decade ago. She contributes nothing. She is a freeloader who decided that instead of earning an honest living, she would manipulate her dying mother and siphon $5 million from a sacred trust fund. The courtroom gasps. It is a soft sound, but it echoes loudly in the cavernous space. My defense attorney, Kenneth, sits next to me. He does not object. He does not interrupt the performance. We had discussed this strategy beforehand. Let them speak. Let them put every lie on the official court record. The more my father perjured himself, the tighter the federal noose would become around his own neck. My father wipes his eyes with a pristine white handkerchief. He tells the jury how he discovered the missing funds. He describes the sleepless nights wondering how his own flesh and blood could be so cold and calculating. He paints a picture of a daughter who spent her 20s lounging in expensive apartments, taking luxury vacations and living entirely off the sweat and blood of her hardworking parents. I listen to his words and marvel at the sheer audacity of his projection. He is accusing me of the exact crimes he is currently committing. He claims I have no job. He claims I am a leech. If the jury actually knew the truth, they would be paralyzed with shock. For the past 10 years, I have not been lounging in luxury apartments. I have been serving as a senior cyber data analytics director for the United States Department of Defense. I hold a top-secret clearance. My daily routine involves tracking international money laundering rings, dismantling cyber terror networks, and protecting the financial infrastructure of this country. I work in windowless rooms with people who do not exist on paper. I do not have a public LinkedIn profile. I do not post my promotions on social media. To the outside world and to my arrogant family, I am just a quiet woman with no visible means of income. They mistook my silence for failure. They mistook my privacy for laziness. My father pulls out a stack of banking documents from his breast pocket. He waves them in the air like a weapon. These bank statements prove everything he declares, his voice booming across the room. They show the exact dates the funds were wired out of Beatrice Trust. They show the destination accounts. Accounts hidden behind shell companies that Naomi set up to hide her tracks. She thought she was so smart. She thought because she spends all day on her computer doing whatever it is she does, that she could outsmart the banks. But we caught her. We found the digital trail. I look at the fake bank statements he is waving around. They are brilliant forgeries. He clearly paid someone a lot of money to fabricate those routing numbers and signature authorizations. He built an entire alternate reality out of forged paper and crocodile tears. He truly believes that because he is a wealthy, respected man in the community, his word will automatically override mine. He assumes the judge will look at me, a seemingly unemployed single woman, and immediately side with the distinguished patriarch. Your Honor, I am not asking for vengeance. My father lies smoothly, looking directly at the judge. I am asking for justice for my late wife. I am asking that you freeze all of Naomi accounts and return the $5 million to the estate where it belongs. She needs to be held accountable. She needs to learn that she cannot just steal from her own family and walk away unpunished. I feel a slight shift in the air behind me. The gallery is packed with my family members who came to watch my public execution. I can feel their eyes burning into the back of my neck. They came dressed in their Sunday best, ready to watch the black sheep of the family finally get slaughtered. They believe every word falling from my father's mouth. They believe I am a thief. They believe they have won. My father finishes his testimony by lowering his head and burying his face in his hands. It is a masterful theatrical finish. The jury looks completely convinced. Several of them are glaring at me, shaking their heads in disgust. The judge, a stern-faced man who commands absolute respect, clears his throat and prepares to speak. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom remain closed, but I know who is waiting on the other side. The trap has been set. The bait has been taken. My father has just sworn under penalty of perjury to a narrative that is about to dismantle his entire life. Judge Sterling taps his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block. He announces we will take a brief 15-minute recess before the defense begins its cross-examination. He steps down from the bench and disappears through the heavy oak doors behind him. The moment the judge leaves the room, the rigid formality of the court vanishes. The atmosphere instantly shifts from solemn to predatory. My father steps down from the witness box, but he does not return to the plaintiff table. Instead, he walks directly to the front row of the gallery where my younger sister Chloe and her husband Trent are sitting. Trent is 32 years old. He is a hedge fund director who thinks he is the smartest person in any room he enters. He is a white man who loves being married into a prominent, wealthy black family because it gives him a convenient shield of false progressiveness. He uses our family name and my father's connections to open doors in elite political circles he could never access on his own merit. Right now, Trent is leaning casually over the wooden partition that separates the gallery from the trial floor. He shoots his cuffs, shooting a perfect glimpse of his platinum Rolex. He looks directly at me, and his blue eyes are flat and dead. You really should have taken the quiet settlement we offered last month, Naomi, he says. His voice carries easily across the silent aisle, intentionally loud enough for the rest of the family to hear. We were trying to be generous. We were trying to keep this out of the public record for your sake. But you just had to be stubborn. Now look at you. You are going to leave this courthouse with absolutely nothing and a criminal referral on your record. Chloe sits beside him, perfectly manicured and draped in seasonal designer couture. She is 30 years old and has been the golden child since the day she was born. She runs a vanity lifestyle brand that produces zero actual profit but looks fantastic on her social media grid. She crosses her legs and gives me a look of profound, exaggerated pity. You are embarrassing us, Naomi, she says, shaking her head slowly. You are embarrassing the entire bloodline. Daddy worked his whole life to build black excellence, to create real generational wealth for this family. He broke through concrete ceilings so we could sit at tables our grandparents only dreamed of. And what do you do with that legacy? You sit in your cheap apartment doing absolutely nothing for 10 years, and then you try to steal the money mom left behind. She does not stop there. The audience of aunts and uncles sitting in the rows behind her fuels her performance. It is just like when you refused to join the corporate law firm Dad set up for you. Chloe continues, her tone dripping with absolute venom. It is just like when you stopped attending the alumni galas and the charity board meetings. You never wanted to put in the actual work to elevate us. You just wanted the reward. You make us all look like a terrible stereotype. The lazy relative waiting for a handout while everyone else builds the empire. Trent chuckles softly. He reaches over and pats my father's shoulder, playing the role of the supportive savior, holding the broken family together. Do not let her get to you, Marcus, Trent says, using that clinical detached tone he reserves for people he views as beneath him. She is just acting out because she knows the game is over. People like her always play the victim when they are finally held accountable. It is a classic behavioral pattern for the chronically unmotivated. Do not let her drag your reputation down with her. He actually thinks he is the one protecting my father's legacy. He stands there, a wealthy white man, lecturing me about my failure to uphold my own family's black excellence, while looking down his nose at my simple emerald suit. I do not break eye contact. I do not raise my voice. I do not give them the reaction they are desperately trying to provoke. I simply reach for the glass of water on my defense table and take a slow, deliberate sip. The ice clinks softly against the glass. My lawyer Kenneth sits beside me, casually reviewing his legal pad. Kenneth is a former federal prosecutor who usually charges $1,000 an hour and holds a security clearance almost as high as mine. But right now, he is wearing a modest off-the-rack suit simply to play the part of an overwhelmed public defender type. He does not even bother looking up at them. He knows exactly what I know. Trent mistakes my silence for submission. He leans further over the rail, a smug smirk playing on his lips. I reviewed your banking history, Naomi, he says, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The real records, not the fantasy defense you are trying to spin. You barely have $2,000 in your checking account. How are you even paying for this lawyer sitting next to you? Is he working pro bono for the courtroom exposure? Chloe places a hand over her heart, playing the devastated sister to perfection. Mom would be so ashamed of you, she says, her voice cracking flawlessly. She wanted us to be a shining example of what a powerful black family could achieve in this city. Instead, you dragged us into a courtroom to fight over her money like common criminals. You are a disgrace to everything she built. I look at Chloe. I look at the massive diamond tennis bracelet sparkling brightly on her wrist as she wipes away a fake tear. I know exactly which offshore account paid for that bracelet. I know the exact routing number. I know the IP address of the encrypted laptop Trent used to transfer the stolen funds from my mother's trust to buy it. They are standing in a federal building, lecturing me about black excellence and generational wealth, while literally wearing the stolen evidence of their own federal crimes. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swing open. The bailiff steps out into the room. All rise, he calls out, his voice echoing against the high ceiling. Judge Sterling is returning to the bench. The recess is over. Trent gives me one last mocking smile before sitting back down next to my sister. He whispers something in her ear that makes her giggle softly behind her hand. They are so incredibly confident in their victory. They have stacked the deck, forged the bank papers, and bought the witnesses. They are absolutely certain that the next 30 minutes will end with me leaving this building in handcuffs. Judge Sterling settles into his high-backed leather chair and adjusts his robes. The heavy silence of the federal courtroom returns instantly. Attorney David Pierce, my father's lead counsel, stands up from the plaintiff table. Pierce is a high-priced shark known for destroying reputations with surgical precision. He buttons his tailored jacket and approaches the bench carrying a thick, glossy binder. This is the moment my family has been waiting for, the final nail in my coffin. Your Honor, Pierce begins, his voice echoing with practiced theatricality. The plaintiff would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. These are the certified financial records obtained by our private forensic accounting team. They detail the exact digital pathway the defendant used to siphon $5 million from her late mother's trust fund. Pierce places the heavy binder on the judge's desk with a loud, deliberate thud. He turns to face the jury box. He walks slowly, making sure every single juror is hanging on his every word. He tells them that I use sophisticated routing software to obscure the transactions. He paints a vivid picture of a greedy, ungrateful daughter sitting in the shadows, moving digital money across borders while her family mourned. He claims these documents prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I created shell companies in the Cayman Islands to hide my stolen wealth. He speaks with such absolute conviction that several jurors nod along in agreement. Their faces are tight with disgust as they look at me. I turn my attention to the evidence monitors mounted across the courtroom displaying the digital copies of the bank statements. I let a slow, deliberate smirk touch the corner of my mouth. From his seat in the gallery, Trent sees my smile. His confident posture stiffens for a fraction of a second. He clearly thinks I am having a mental break. He thinks I am smiling out of pure desperation. He has absolutely no idea what I am actually looking at. Trent and my father hired someone very expensive to fabricate these documents. The forgery is a masterpiece of deception. The routing numbers look entirely legitimate. The digital signatures mimic international banking protocols flawlessly. The offshore account designations are perfectly formatted to trick a civilian financial auditor. For a standard federal court, it is irrefutable proof of grand larceny. But I am not a civilian, and I do not spend my days playing on a laptop in a cheap apartment like my sister Chloe claims. For the last decade, I have been the ghost in the machine for the United States Department of Defense. I am a senior cyber data analytics director. I hold a top-secret clearance that requires background checks so invasive they interview people I knew in middle school. My actual job, the one my family dismisses as a shameful lie, involves tracking the movement of illicit funds across global terror networks. I design the exact algorithms the Pentagon uses to detect international money laundering. I know how dark money moves because I built the invisible architecture that tracks it for the United States government. Watching my father and Trent submit these forged documents as official court evidence is like watching a toddler try to explain quantum physics to the scientist who wrote the textbook. They are so blinded by their own arrogance, they did not realize the fatal error in their fake paper trail. The offshore routing numbers they fabricated do not just point to a random shell company. By pure catastrophic coincidence, the fake account structure they purchased on the black market mirrors a flagged server network currently monitored by my own intelligence division. By submitting these specific documents into the official federal court record, my father has not just lied to a judge, he has legally tied his own name and his own real estate empire to a financial network currently under active investigation by the United States Treasury for violating international sanctions. He thinks he is proving I am a thief. In reality, he is handing the federal government a signed confession to international money laundering and wire fraud. Pierce finishes his grand closing argument by pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. He demands that the court immediately freeze all my remaining assets. He demands a summary judgment in favor of my father. He formally requests that the judge refer me to the district attorney for immediate criminal prosecution. The gallery is completely still. Chloe leans her head on Trent's shoulder, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. My father bows his head at the plaintiff table, burying his face in his hands to play the devastated patriarch one last time. They are glowing with victory. They think they have completely destroyed me. They think the game is over and they have won the grand prize. Judge Sterling slowly closes the leather binder. He takes off his reading glasses and sets them down on the mahogany wood. His expression is carved from stone. He looks over at the jury box and then he turns his piercing gaze directly onto me. The weight of his authority fills the entire room. He presses his hands flat against the bench. He states that the evidence presented by the plaintiff is highly irregular but incredibly damning. He speaks about the sacred bond of family trust and the absolute severity of financial elder abuse. He says that the financial trail presented in Exhibit A leaves very little room for interpretation regarding where the funds originated and where they currently reside. Every word he speaks sounds like a heavy iron door slamming shut on my future. My father peeks through his fingers to watch my reaction. Trent crosses his arms over his chest, completely satisfied with his handiwork. Judge Sterling picks up his heavy wooden gavel. He holds it suspended in the air. The polished wood gleams under the bright fluorescent lights of the courtroom. The tension in the room is so thick it threatens to snap. He looks down at my defense attorney Kenneth and asks if we have any final motions or evidence to present before he officially strikes his gavel, issues his ruling, and closes this case permanently. The heavy wooden gavel hovers in the air. That polished wood gleams under the bright fluorescent lights, pulling my mind backward. The anticipated crack of the judge striking the block sounds remarkably like the sharp clinking of crystal glasses. The courtroom fades away, replaced by the suffocating atmosphere of the formal dining room at our family estate exactly 3 months ago. It was the Sunday evening immediately following my mother's funeral. The air in the sprawling mansion was thick and oppressive, heavy, with the overwhelming scent of white lilies and roasted meats. My mother's ornate, high-backed chair sat empty at the head of the long mahogany table. I sat near the far end wearing a simple black mourning dress, completely drained from a week of profound grief. I kept my eyes focused on the porcelain plate in front of me, trying to process the reality that the only person in this family who actually loved me was gone. My father, Marcus, sat at the opposite end of the table. The tears he had so publicly shed at the gravesite just hours earlier had completely vanished. He swirled a glass of expensive bourbon, his posture relaxed and unnervingly comfortable. He did not look like a man who had just buried his wife of 35 years. He looked like a CEO who had just completed a hostile takeover. Chloe and Trent sat directly across from me. They had barely spoken to me during the entire funeral service, but now the masks were beginning to slip. Trent sliced his steak with slow, deliberate movements. He chewed, swallowed, and looked at me with that signature arrogant smirk. He was a white man sitting at the table of a wealthy black family, feeling entirely too comfortable weaponizing our own cultural expectations against me. "It is a real shame you could not chip in for the floral arrangements at the church," Naomi Trent said, his voice cutting cleanly through the quiet chatter of the relatives. He wiped his mouth with a monogrammed linen napkin. "I mean, we understand, of course. Living on a tight budget in that little apartment of yours means making difficult financial sacrifices. But it just looked a bit cheap that Chloe and Marcus had to cover your portion of your own mother's memorial." The sheer audacity of his comment hung in the air. I had tried to pay for the flowers. I had offered to cover the entire catering bill for the repast. Marcus had deliberately blocked my payments, insisting the family business would handle everything. He set up this narrative specifically to humiliate me. Chloe chimed in immediately, adjusting the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the expensive lace tablecloth. "Mom was always so terribly worried about you, Naomi," she said, her voice dripping with venom, masquerading as sibling concern. "She spent her last days stressing over how you would survive without a real career or a husband to support you. You really let her down, you know. You have a degree from Spelman College. You had every door opened for you. And you chose to do absolutely nothing. You bring zero value to this family name." I slowly looked up from my plate. Around the massive dining table, my aunts, uncles, and cousins sat in complete silence. They continued eating their candied yams and collard greens, pretending not to hear the vicious attack happening right in front of them. In our community, wealth dictates respect and influence. Marcus held the purse strings to the family investments. Marcus controlled the access to the country club memberships and the corporate board seats. Because Marcus held the power, nobody dared to speak up. They just looked down at their plates, entirely complicit in my public execution. My father tapped his silver fork against his crystal bourbon glass. The sharp ringing sound demanded absolute obedience from everyone in the room. He stood up slowly, smoothing the lapels of his custom-tailored morning suit. The facade of the loving, grieving father melted away, leaving only a cold and calculating predator. "Your sister is absolutely right," Marcus declared, his voice booming across the dining room, devoid of any paternal warmth. "Your mother and I sacrificed our youth to build an empire of black excellence. We fought tooth and nail for a seat at tables our own grandparents were not even allowed to clean. We created real generational wealth, And you, Naomi, have squandered every single opportunity we handed you. You are a lazy, unmotivated stain on this family legacy." He paced slowly behind his empty chair, letting his harsh words sink into the minds of the silent relatives. I remained perfectly still, gripping the linen napkin in my lap. I knew my mother better than any of them. Beatrice despised Marcus and his relentless greed. She knew exactly what kind of ruthless man she had married, and she loved me precisely because I refused to participate in his shallow corporate games. But I could not defend her memory right now without exposing my own secrets. I maintained my absolute silence, letting them expose the darkest depths of their true nature. Trent chuckled softly, pouring himself another glass of wine. "It is tragic, really," Trent added, shaking his head. "You have all this pedigree, all this history, and you choose to be a parasite. It makes the whole family look bad to our investors." I stared directly into Trent's cold blue eyes. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass. I simply sat there enduring the toxic barrage while cataloging every single insult. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my lack of a flashy job title meant I was defenseless. They had no idea they were insulting a woman who routinely briefed military generals on global security threats. Marcus walked back to his seat, but he did not sit down. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. He slapped it down onto the mahogany table with a resounding thud that made several ants jump in their seats. "Because of your chronic instability and your sheer lack of ambition," Marcus announced, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute malice, "I have decided to make some immediate changes to how this family operates moving forward. Your mother was too soft on you. She enabled your laziness. But I will not allow you to drain our resources any longer. I am executing the final directives of your mother's estate right here and right now." Chloe smiled brightly, leaning closer to Trent. The predatory anticipation in her eyes was unmistakable. The trap they had spent weeks planning was finally springing shut. Marcus placed his hand flat over the legal document, preparing to strip away every last remnant of my security. Marcus slides the heavy document across the polished mahogany surface. The thick pages stop right at the edge of my dinner plate. The gold foil seal of my mother's estate attorney sits in the corner, but the paper feels entirely wrong. I do not touch it immediately. I just stare at the bold black ink on the cover page. "This is an updated will," my father announces, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Your mother and I had a long, heartbreaking conversation during her final weeks. She finally opened her eyes to the truth about you, Naomi. She realized that leaving you a substantial trust fund would only enable your chronic laziness. She tasked me and Trent with restructuring her assets to protect the family legacy." Trent nods solemnly, attempting to look like a responsible fiduciary rather than a common thief. "It was a complex legal process," Trent adds, pouring himself another glass of a vintage Bordeaux my mother had been saving for a special occasion. "Beatrice wanted to ensure the wealth stayed within the working, productive members of this family. We simply executed her dying wishes. We redirected your portion of the trust into a high-yield investment portfolio managed by my firm. It will be held securely for Chloe's future children. You know, the ones who will actually carry on the black excellence this family represents." I slowly reach out and flip open the heavy cover page. My eyes scan the legal jargon. It is an absolute masterpiece of corporate theft. The clauses are completely packed with predatory hedge fund terminology designed to strip the beneficiary of all rights while granting the executor total immunity. My mother, Beatrice, was a high school literature teacher who despised corporate greed. She would never use terms like capital reallocation and deferred dividend shielding. Then I see the signature at the bottom of the final page. My heart turns to absolute ice. The handwriting is a nearly flawless imitation, but the loop on the letter B is tilted at the wrong angle. My mother always wrote her signature with a sharp, aggressive slant she developed in her 20s. This signature is too perfectly rounded. Trent and Marcus had forged my dying mother's signature to steal my inheritance. I look up from the fraudulent document. I do not scream. I do not flip the table. I simply fold my hands in my lap and look directly at my father. He expects tears. He expects begging. When he receives nothing but calm silence, a flicker of genuine irritation crosses his face. Because you are no longer a beneficiary under this revised document? Marcus continues, his tone growing colder and far more aggressive. You no longer have any right to the resources of this estate. That includes your access to the family accounts. He extends an open hand across the table, palm facing up. Hand over the black American Express card, Naomi, and the keys to the guest house. You are done bleeding us dry. Chloe leans forward, her eyes gleaming with absolute delight. She has waited her entire life for this specific moment. She wants to see me stripped of everything, humiliated and thrown out into the street. It is just business, Naomi, she says, offering a sickly sweet smile. You have to understand, we simply cannot fund your lifestyle anymore. It is time for you to grow up and face the real world. I slowly reach into my tailored blazer. I pull out the black American Express card my father gave me 5 years ago. I have not used it a single time since the day he handed it to me. My federal salary and my classified bonuses are deposited directly into a secure government credit union account they know absolutely nothing about. I place the pristine, unused credit card onto the mahogany table. I pull the brass key to the guest house from my pocket and set it gently next to the card. Marcus snatches both items off the table as if they might catch fire. Good, he says, slipping them into his pocket. Now go upstairs, pack whatever cheap clothes you brought with you, and get out of my house. I want you off this property tonight. Several of the aunts and uncles shift uncomfortably in their seats, but still nobody says a single word. My father is officially throwing his eldest daughter out into the night, immediately following her mother's funeral, and the entire family is too cowardly to intervene. I push my chair back. The wooden legs scrape loudly against the marble floor. I stand up, smoothing the front of my black morning dress. I do not say a word to any of them. I simply turn and begin walking toward the grand foyer. Wait, Trent calls out, his voice dripping with condescension. I stop and look back over my shoulder. Trent pushes his chair back and stands up. He reaches into the inner pocket of his designer suit jacket and pulls out a sleek leather wallet. He deliberately pulls out a single crisp $100 bill. He walks around the table, approaching me with the swagger of a man who believes he holds all the power in the world. He stops 2 feet away from me. He holds the bill between his index and middle fingers. He does not hand it to me. He opens his fingers and lets the $100 bill flutter to the hardwood floor, landing directly at the tip of my shoes. Call an Uber, Trent says, his lips curling into a cruel sneer. The family drivers have the night off, and our cars do not carry thieves. Consider this a final charitable donation from the family you disappointed. Do not ever say we did not take care of you. Chloe laughs. It is a sharp, vicious sound that echoes through the dining room. Marcus smiles proudly at his son-in-law. They have orchestrated the ultimate humiliation. They have stripped me of my home, my inheritance, and my dignity right in front of the entire family. I look down at the crumpled $100 bill on the floor. I look back up at Trent's smug face. He is waiting for me to bend down and pick it up. He wants to watch me grovel for his spare change. I step directly over the money. My heel leaves a faint scuff mark on the face of the bill as I walk past it. I do not look back. I walk straight up the grand sweeping staircase to pack my bags, leaving them sitting in their stolen mansion surrounded by their stolen wealth. They think they have just won the war. They have absolutely no idea they just handed the federal government everything it needs to destroy them. I enter my old bedroom and pull a simple tactical duffel bag from the back of the closet. I do not bother folding the expensive silk dresses or the designer handbags my mother bought me years ago to make me fit her aesthetic. I leave them all hanging in the closet. I only pack my encrypted government laptop, my secure communications array, and a few basic items of clothing. The entire process takes less than 4 minutes. I move with the precision of a woman who has packed for emergency extractions in foreign countries. They think I am crying into a pillow. In reality, I am running a threat assessment on my own family. I pull my secure phone from my blazer pocket. I open a heavily encrypted logistics application strictly reserved for high-ranking defense officials. I retrieve a solid black titanium card from my wallet. It has no bank logo, no identifying markers, and no spending limit. It is a federal logistics authorization card. I scan it against the back of the phone requesting immediate secure transport. The screen blinks green. A vehicle is dispatched from the nearest federal staging point. I zip the duffel bag and walk back down the grand sweeping staircase. The dining room is still buzzing with conversation. Trent is pouring more of my mother's vintage wine, holding court and laughing loudly. Chloe is showing one of our aunts something on her phone, probably the diamond bracelet she bought with stolen money. They stop talking when they hear my footsteps echoing on the marble floor of the foyer. Trent steps out of the dining room, leaning against the grand archway with his wine glass in hand. Chloe follows closely behind him, crossing her arms over her chest. "Did you find that $100 bill I left for you?" Trent asks, a mocking grin plastered across his face. "Because you are really going to need it to pay for that Uber out of our neighborhood. The gate guards do not let cheap cabs up the main driveway, you know." I do not respond. I simply stand by the heavy oak front doors, waiting in absolute silence. My calm demeanor clearly irritates them. They expected a breakdown. They wanted a screaming match to justify kicking me out. My silence robs them of their victory lap. Suddenly, high-intensity LED headlights sweep across the massive frosted glass panels of the front doors. The heavy, unmistakable crunch of reinforced tires on the gravel driveway cuts through the quiet night. The vehicle does not park on the street like a standard rideshare. It pulls directly up to the grand portico, stopping right at the front steps. Trent frowns. He opens the front doors to assert his dominance over whatever driver dared to pull up so close to the estate. Chloe peers over his shoulder, eager to watch me leave in disgrace. Sitting in the driveway is an absolutely massive matte black Chevrolet Suburban. It is not a standard luxury vehicle. The suspension sits abnormally high to accommodate military-grade armor plating. The windows are tinted so dark they absorb the light from the porch lamps. The tires are thick, run-flat tactical rubber. And mounted on the front bumper is a distinct solid white license plate with bold blue lettering signifying a United States government-exempt vehicle. The driver's side door opens. A tall, broad-shouldered man steps out onto the driveway. He is wearing a sharp dark suit. A coiled acoustic earpiece rests clearly behind his right ear. He does not look like a gig worker picking up a late-night fare. He looks like federal security. He walks around the front of the SUV, his eyes scanning the perimeter with cold professional efficiency before he opens the rear passenger door and stands at attention. Trent grips his wine glass tightly. His arrogant smirk falters for a fraction of a second. His brain, a brain wired purely for corporate greed and shallow status symbols, struggles to process the vehicle sitting in his driveway. But his massive ego quickly rushes in to fill the gap in his logic. "You have got to be kidding me!" Trent scoffs, taking a sip of his wine to mask his sudden unease. "You actually blew the last of your credit limit on an armored luxury rental. Are you trying to pretend you are some kind of VIP Naomi? This is exactly why you are broke. You spend money you do not have on cheap theatrical stunts just to look important." Chloe laughs, placing her hand on Trent's arm to steady herself. "It is pathetic," she adds, shaking her head. "She probably hired some private security cosplay company to try and intimidate us. Let her waste her money, Trent. By tomorrow morning, she will be sleeping in a motel complaining about how unfair the world is." They actually believe their own lies. They look at a highly classified federal transport vehicle, and their minds immediately shrink it down to a petty sibling rivalry stunt. They are so consumed by their own superficial vanity that they cannot recognize real power when it is idling directly on their front lawn. I adjust the strap of my duffel bag on my shoulder. I walk past them, stepping out into the cool night air. The man in the dark suit gives me a sharp, respectful nod as I approach the vehicle. He does not speak because he knows my security protocol requires absolute discretion. I slide into the back of the SUV. The heavy armored door shuts behind me with a solid vault-like thud, locking me inside a soundproof, secure environment. Through the thick ballistic glass, I watch Trent and Chloe standing on the porch of the stolen mansion. Trent raises his wine glass in a mock salute, a final, arrogant gesture of triumph. Chloe waves goodbye, with fingers dripping in diamonds purchased with federal wire fraud. I do not wave back. I just watch them fade into the darkness as the massive SUV pulls smoothly down the driveway. They are standing in a house paid for by a dead woman convinced they are untouchable royalty. They have absolutely no idea that the vehicle carrying me away is taking me straight to a secure terminal where I will begin dismantling every single piece of their stolen empire. The armored SUV glides silently through the empty city streets, heading toward a nondescript high-rise in the financial district. The vehicle descends into a restricted subterranean parking garage. The heavy steel gate closes behind us, sealing me inside a secure federal perimeter. I step out of the vehicle and take the private elevator directly to the penthouse level. The doors open to a stark, minimalist apartment. There are no family portraits here. There are no vintage wine collections or crystal chandeliers. There is only cold, polished steel, bulletproof glass, and an uninterrupted view of the city skyline. I drop my tactical duffel bag onto the glass dining table. I do not waste a single second feeling sorry for myself. Grief is a luxury I can afford later. Right now, I have a financial network to dismantle. I unzip the bag and pull out my encrypted government laptop. I connect the secure satellite uplink module, turning this civilian apartment into a classified Department of Defense workstation. The screen boots up, requesting multi-factor authentication. I press my thumb against the biometric scanner. I lean forward for the retinal sweep. The system verifies my identity and grants me immediate access to the highest levels of the United States military and financial intelligence databases. My fingers fly across the keyboard. I open the tracking software I personally developed for the Pentagon. It is a highly classified algorithmic program designed to hunt down the invisible financial footprints of international terror cells and global crime syndicates. Tonight, I am pointing that weapon directly at my own family. I input the banking details Trent so arrogantly displayed on those forged documents. He truly believed he was a financial mastermind. He thought using a few offshore shell companies and automated layering techniques would make the money disappear forever. He assumed he was dealing with a technologically illiterate sister-in-law. He did not realize he was leaving a digital trail glowing as bright as a distress beacon on a radar screen. The algorithm begins chewing through the data. I watch the screen as the $5 million from my mother's trust fund fractures into dozens of smaller transactions. Trent moved the money through a dummy corporation in Delaware. Then he bounced it to a holding firm in Cyprus. Finally, he routed the consolidated funds into a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It is a classic textbook money laundering maneuver. It would absolutely fool a standard civilian tax auditor. But against a military-grade tracking system, it is nothing but child's play. I bypass the Cayman bank firewalls using federal override protocols. I locate the final destination account. I want to see exactly where my mother's life savings ended up. I pull the registration data for the holding company controlling the offshore account. I cross-reference the corporate registration number against the Office of Foreign Assets Control database. I expect to find a generic greedy hedge fund or a tax evasion shelter. I expect to find evidence of standard corporate theft. Instead, the entire screen flashes bright red. A severe threat warning overrides my display. The system immediately locks down the data file, triggering an automatic alert protocol. My heart skips a beat. The flashing red banner on my screen indicates a direct match with the specially designated nationals and blocked persons list. I stare at the classified intelligence report unspooling on my monitor. The shell company holding my mother's $5 million does not belong to Trent. It does not belong to my father. It belongs to a brutal international syndicate actively sanctioned by the United States government for weapons trafficking and global espionage. The reality of the situation hits me like a physical blow. Trent and Marcus did not just forge a will to steal from me. They used my mother's pristine, unsullied trust fund to wash $5 million of dirty money for an organization explicitly blacklisted by the Pentagon. They needed clean, untraceable cash to fund an illegal international venture and they used Beatrice's legacy as the ultimate cover story. They thought they were just committing domestic fraud. They thought the worst possible outcome was a messy family lawsuit over inheritance money. They had absolutely no comprehension of the catastrophic global tripwire they had just stepped on. I leaned back in my chair, the cool light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The sheer scale of their arrogance has blinded them to the lethal danger they are now in. They are not just greedy relatives fighting over real estate and jewelry. They are actively funding enemies of the state. They have crossed the line from petty white-collar criminals to federal traitors. I reach out and press a single key on my laptop, officially flagging the transaction for a joint investigation by the Department of Defense and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have them. They handed me the exact rope I need to hang them. My father and my brother-in-law are going to walk into federal court expecting to crush a helpless unemployed daughter. They have no idea they are walking straight into a federal trap. The harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom pull me back to the present moment. The memory of that armored SUV and the blinking red threat level on my secure monitor fades as Judge Sterling shifts his gaze from my father back to my defense table. Does the defense have any final motions or evidence to present before I issue my ruling? Judge Sterling asks, his voice carrying a warning tone that suggests he has already made up his mind. Kenneth leans towards me. He knows the exact contents of that federal dossier sitting in my encrypted file. He knows we could stop this farce right now simply by objecting to the admissibility of the forged bank statements. He raises his pen, preparing to stand and dismantle my father's entire case before it goes any further. I place my hand firmly over his wrist. I press down just enough to keep him seated. "No, Your Honor," Kenneth says smoothly, taking my cue without missing a single beat. The defense has no objections to the evidence submitted by the plaintiff at this time. A collective sigh of relief sweeps through the gallery behind me. Chloe actually claps her hands together in a silent gesture of prayer fulfilled. Trent leans back in his wooden pew, crossing his arms with an expression of absolute triumphant vindication. They believe I have completely surrendered. They think I am too broke, too intimidated, and too exhausted to fight back against their overwhelming resources. My father stands up from the plaintiff table, pushing his shoulders back to project the image of a merciful patriarch who has just completed a painful but necessary duty. He looks at me with a mixture of fake pity and highly calculated contempt. He walks over to the court clerk and officially hands over the thick, glossy binder containing the fabricated routing numbers and the fake Cayman Islands offshore accounts. "Let the record show that Plaintiff Exhibit A has been formally submitted into evidence," the clerk announces, stamping the heavy manila folder with the official seal of the United States District Court. That sharp, hollow thud of the ink stamp hitting the paper is the absolute sweetest sound I have heard in my entire life. My father walks back to his seat, completely oblivious to the invisible guillotine he just placed his own neck inside. He thinks this is just a standard civil dispute over a dead woman's money. He thinks the worst possible consequence of losing this case would be a mild financial penalty or a stern talking to by a local judge. He has absolutely no comprehension of the catastrophic legal threshold he just crossed. He does not understand the fundamental difference between a state civil court and the federal judiciary system. By paying a black market hacker to fabricate international banking records, he committed a standard white-collar crime. But by physically carrying those forged documents into a federal courthouse and officially submitting them into the national record to defraud a United States citizen, he just committed federal perjury. He did not just lie to his daughter today, he lied to the United States government. And because those specific fake routing numbers correspond to a sanctioned international syndicate, his little theatrical performance just elevated his crime from standard fraud to a level 1 national security threat. I watched the court clerk log the binder into the digital evidence database. The moment that file uploads to the federal server, it triggers an automated cross-reference algorithm I helped design for the Pentagon. Somewhere in Virginia, a server farm is already pinging a red alert to a financial crimes task force. Trent checks his platinum Rolex, completely unaware that his own offshore accounts are currently being frozen by a synchronized federal override. He thinks he is about to leave this building and celebrate my downfall at an expensive steakhouse. He thinks he's going to raise a glass to his own brilliance. Every single lie my father told on that witness stand, every fake tear he shed, and every fabricated document he submitted just added a mandatory minimum of 5 years to his impending federal prison sentence. I look at him as he settles back into his chair. For 34 years, he used his wealth and his influence to control every narrative. He weaponized our family name to crush anyone who stood in his way. He thought he could do the exact same thing to me. He thought because I did not wear designer suits or attend elite country club dinners, I was inherently weak. I let them enjoy their final seconds of absolute arrogance. I let them savor the illusion of their supremacy. They have spent my entire life making me feel small and powerless. They spent the last 3 months trying to strip away my dignity and my mother's legacy. Now the snare is perfectly set. The bait has been swallowed whole. My father has officially tied the knot of his own destruction and handed the rope directly to the Department of Defense. Judge Sterling picks up the submitted documents, adjusting his reading glasses. He flips through the first few pages of the forged bank statements. The courtroom holds its collective breath, waiting for the final devastating blow to fall on my shoulders. But I am not bracing for impact. I am simply waiting for the clock to run out. The silence in the courtroom stretches, giving me a moment to reflect on exactly how Trent sealed his own fate just 48 hours ago. He had summoned me to the Reserve, an obnoxiously exclusive coffee shop in the financial district. It is the kind of place where men like Trent pay $20 for a latte just to prove they can. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table wearing a bespoke navy suit and projecting an aura of absolute invincibility. He did not stand to greet me. He simply pushed a thick manila folder across the polished marble table. Inside was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and a legally binding waiver of all inheritance rights. Trent has always viewed my family as a stepping stone. He married my sister Chloe because she fit his aesthetic of the perfect, compliant minority wife who would never question his authority. He looks at my father not as a mentor, but as a useful tool to access minority business grants and urban development contracts. And he looks at me as an aberration, a glitch, in his perfectly curated world. To him, I am just the stubborn black woman who refuses to play along with his savior complex. "I am offering you a lifeline, Naomi," he said, taking a slow sip of his espresso. "Your father is furious, but I convinced him to give you one last chance. Sign the waiver, relinquish any claim to Beatrice's estate, and we will drop the lawsuit. We will even give you a $10,000 relocation stipend to help you start over somewhere else, somewhere far away from our family." I looked down at the documents. They were drafted by a high-priced corporate law firm meant to intimidate a civilian into submission. I kept my face perfectly blank, projecting the exact image of a defeated, desperate woman he expected to see. "I do not understand, Trent," I said, keeping my voice intentionally soft and uncertain. "How did you and my father even access the trust? The bank requires dual authorization, and moving $5 million without triggering an IRS audit seems impossible." That was all he needed. Trent's ego has always been his greatest weakness. He cannot resist the opportunity to demonstrate his intellectual superiority, especially to a woman he considers vastly beneath his station. He leaned across the table, a condescending smile stretching across his face. "It is about understanding global capital flow, Naomi," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Something you would know if you had actually finished your degree and joined the real world instead of wallowing in self-pity. You think the system is designed to protect people, but it is actually designed to protect capital." He could not help himself. He started bragging. He laid out the entire criminal enterprise right there over overpriced coffee. He explained how he used his hedge fund's infrastructure to establish a dummy corporation in Delaware. He detailed how Marcus signed the fraudulent executor authorizations while Chloe distracted the notary public. "We are building real generational wealth," Trent boasted, his blue eyes gleaming with raw greed. "While you were doing absolutely nothing, your father and I secured a partnership with a highly lucrative foreign investment group. We routed the capital through Cyprus and parked it in a Cayman Islands holding account. It is brilliant restructuring. We took stagnant money and put it to work. He explicitly named the holding company, the exact same company currently sitting on the Pentagon sanctions list for funding international terrorism and illegal weapons trafficking. So you and my father orchestrated this entire transfer together, I asked, needing him to verbalize the conspiracy. The offshore routing, the forged signatures, all of it. Trent laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. We protected the family assets. Marcus authorized the strategy, and I executed the digital transfers. We are a team. We are the architects of this family's future. And you are permanently out of the game. Sign the paper, take the settlement, and disappear before we decide to send you to prison. I slowly reached up and adjusted the small emerald brooch pinned to the lapel of my blazer. Trent glanced at it briefly, probably assuming it was a cheap piece of costume jewelry I bought at a thrift store. He had absolutely no idea that the vintage-looking pin was a Level 4 encrypted acoustic transmitter issued exclusively by federal intelligence agencies. Every single word of his arrogant confession, every detail about the Delaware shell companies, the forged signatures, and the Cayman accounts was not just recorded. It was transmitted live via a secure satellite uplink directly to a Department of Defense server farm in Virginia. He thought he was intimidating a helpless dropout. He was actually giving a sworn audio confession to a federal agent. I pushed the manila folder back across the marble table. The heavy paper slid until it bumped against his coffee cup. "I will not be signing anything, Trent," I said, standing up from the table. "I will see you in court," he sneered, shaking his head in mock pity. "You are making the biggest mistake of your pathetic life, Naomi. When the judge sees our evidence, you are going to leave the courthouse in handcuffs." I simply turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him to pay the bill. He was so incredibly proud of his flawless criminal masterpiece. Now, back in the present moment, inside the silent federal courtroom, I watched Judge Sterling slowly turn the final page of Trent's fabricated bank statements. The judge removes his reading glasses and sets them carefully on the mahogany bench. The air in the room grows heavy, cold, and dangerously still. Trent is sitting in the gallery directly behind me. I can hear him shifting comfortably in his wooden pew, entirely unaware that the trap he bragged about building has just slammed shut on his own leg. He believes his wealth and his whiteness make him untouchable in a courtroom. He believes the system was designed to protect men exactly like him. He has spent years treating my family like a lucrative hobby and treating me like dirt on his shoe. Judge Sterling folds his hands together. He looks down at my father, who is seated at the plaintiff table, wearing a mask of fabricated grief. Then the judge looks directly at me. The moment of absolute reckoning has arrived. The intense gaze of Judge Sterling remains fixed on me, but my heart rate stays perfectly steady. While my father and Trent sit in this courtroom radiating blind confidence, my mind traces back to the exact moment their financial empire was reduced to absolute zero. It happened just 12 hours ago in the dead of night, while they were busy celebrating a victory they had not yet won. I was sitting in my secure apartment watching the city lights reflect off the bulletproof glass. My personal cell phone, the one my family believes is my only lifeline to the outside world, buzzed aggressively on the steel dining table. It was the Williams family legacy group chat. Chloe had initiated a massive digital assault. She tagged over 40 extended family members, including our aunts, uncles, and cousins. She weaponized our family history, typing out paragraphs of pure venom designed to isolate and destroy me right before the trial. "Tomorrow morning, our family finally cuts out the cancer," she typed. "Naomi is going to court to answer for what she did to our mother. Daddy and Trent have bulletproof evidence. Pray for our father's strength as he puts this criminal behind bars. We are cleaning up the bloodline." My phone vibrated continuously as the notifications flooded the screen. Aunt Sarah sent a praying hands emoji, followed by a long message about how the devil works in mysterious ways. Cousin Jamal chimed in, calling me a disgrace to the opportunities our ancestors fought for. Uncle Marcus' brother wrote a scathing paragraph about how Beatrice would be rolling in her grave knowing she birthed a thief. Chloe was thriving on the attention. She continued feeding them a fabricated narrative about my supposed jealousy and my mental instability. She praised Trent, elevating her white husband to the status of a savior who was bravely protecting a prominent black family from its own rogue daughter. She painted him as the ultimate protector of our generational wealth. I sat in the dark reading every single message. I watched my own flesh and blood tear me apart, based on lies fed to them by a greedy patriarch and a predatory hedge fund director. A younger version of me would have typed out a frantic defense. I would have sent screenshots, begged for them to listen, and cried when they inevitably took my father's side. But I am not that girl anymore. I did not type a single letter in that group chat. I put the cell phone face down on the glass table, muting the notifications. I turned my attention to the glowing monitors of my encrypted Department of Defense workstation. The blue light washed over my face as I opened the Federal Intelligence database. While Chloe was frantically typing insults on her customized smartphone, my fingers hovered over a mechanical keyboard wired directly into the United States Treasury's financial enforcement network. Trent was so incredibly proud of the offshore architecture he had built. He thought his Cayman Islands holding accounts in Cyprus shell companies were invisible. He did not know that by routing my mother's trust fund into a network flagged for international weapons trafficking, he had legally stripped away every single layer of his financial privacy. He was no longer an American citizen engaging in domestic fraud. He was an active target of the Patriot Act. I pulled up the master ledger for Trent's entire hedge fund. I did not just target the $5 million he stole from me. Because he commingled those stolen funds with his own corporate assets, the entire network was completely compromised. The algorithms had mapped every single dollar attached to his name, his personal checking accounts, his offshore tax shelters, the routing numbers tied to Chloe's vanity lifestyle brand, the deed to the stolen mansion they kicked me out of. I initiated the Federal Asset Seizure Protocol. The command prompt blinked on the black screen waiting for my authorization. I did not hesitate. I typed the execution code and hit the enter key. The response from the federal servers was instantaneous. A cascade of green confirmation text flooded my monitor. Global asset freeze authorized, account seizure initiated, routing pathways terminated. In a matter of milliseconds, the United States government descended upon Trent's financial empire. I watched the live telemetry as his Cayman Islands accounts were frozen by international compliance warrants. I watched the Cyprus holding companies get locked down by anti-terrorism sanctions. I watched the domestic banking institutions automatically suspend his personal and corporate credit lines, pending a federal investigation. Chloe was still sending venomous texts to our relatives bragging about the designer outfits she was going to buy for her victory party. She had absolutely no idea that the credit cards sitting in her expensive purse were currently declining. Trent was likely sleeping soundly in my mother's old master bedroom, dreaming about his genius legal strategy. He had no clue that his net worth had just dropped from $40 million to absolute zero. I dismantled his entire life without making a single sound. I did not argue. I did not defend myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I let them keep their digital echo chamber, while I quietly locked the doors to their financial prison. Now sitting at the defense table in this grand federal courtroom, I look over my shoulder at the gallery. Chloe is whispering to one of our aunts, her posture screaming with unearned superiority. Trent is checking his platinum Rolex again, a watch he technically no longer owns because it was purchased with frozen funds subject to federal forfeiture. They are staring at me, waiting for the judge to strike his gavel and end my life. They do not realize they are breathing dead air. They are financially ruined, federally flagged, and entirely out of options. They just do not know it yet. Judge Sterling clears his throat, breaking the absolute silence of the room. He looks at me with a gaze that commands total obedience. The final act of this theatrical performance has arrived. The trap is completely shut. It is time to let them see the teeth. Miss Williams, Judge Sterling, begins, his voice carrying the deep, resonant timbre of absolute authority. The plaintiff has presented a highly disturbing timeline of events. They have submitted financial records indicating a deliberate and sophisticated effort to siphon $5 million from your late mother's estate. They have painted a picture of egregious financial elder abuse. I keep my posture perfectly straight. I do not look away from him. Judge Sterling is not just any federal magistrate. He is a man who had to fight through decades of systemic prejudice to earn his seat on the bench. He is a fierce protector of our community's integrity, known for handing down maximum sentences to those who exploit their own people for financial gain. Right now, he is looking down at me with a gaze heavy with profound disappointment. He believes he is looking at a woman who betrayed the fundamental principles of family and respect. He sees a parasite. He sees exactly what my father wants him to see. Before I issue my ruling, the judge continues tapping his pen against the thick stack of forged documents my father submitted. Before I grant the plaintiff's motion to permanently freeze all of your financial assets and refer this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution, I am giving you one final opportunity to speak. The entire courtroom seems to hold its breath. In the gallery behind me, I can hear the soft rustle of expensive fabric as my extended family leans forward. They are hungry for my humiliation. They want to hear my voice crack. They want to see the exact moment my spirit breaks. My father Marcus sits at the plaintiff table. He lowers his head, resting his chin on his steepled fingers, playing the part of a devastated parent bracing himself for his daughter's desperate excuses. Marcus has always been a master manipulator, weaponizing his status to control the narrative. He has spent his entire life building an empire on the backs of others, hiding behind the polished veneer of a successful black businessman. He is absolutely certain that his performance today has cemented his victory. He thinks the legal system is just another tool he can buy and use to sweep me under the rug. Trent lets out a barely audible scoff, a tiny sound of pure arrogant dismissal. He is practically vibrating with excitement in the front row. He has his arm draped casually around Chloe, whispering in her ear. I know exactly what they are waiting for. They are waiting for the bailiff to approach me. They are waiting for the judge to declare me destitute, to freeze the imaginary checking account they think is my only lifeline. They are eagerly anticipating the moment I break down and beg for the mercy they have already decided to deny me. Do you have anything to say in your defense, Miss Williams? Judge Sterling asks, leaning forward over the heavy mahogany bench. Is there any evidence, any witness, or any statement you wish to enter into the official record before I strike my gavel and close this civil proceeding? I look at the judge. I see a man who has dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of justice. He looks at me and sees a parasitic daughter who stole from a dying woman. He has absolutely no idea that in less than 60 seconds, I am going to hand him the most significant national security indictment this federal district has seen in 20 years. I do not break eye contact with the judge. I place my hands flat on the polished wooden table in front of me. The cool surface grounds me. I think about my mother Beatrice, who despised the shallow corporate greed my father represented. I think about the years of subtle insults, the blatant disrespect, and the ruthless way they threw me out into the street on the night of her funeral. I think about Trent throwing a $100 bill at my feet and telling me to call a rideshare. They wanted me to be nothing. They needed me to be powerless so they could feel powerful. I push my chair back. The wooden legs scrape sharply against the courtroom floor, a harsh sound that cuts through the suffocating silence. I stand up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored emerald suit. I do not tremble. I do not look back at the gallery. I do not look at my father. I stand to my full height, squaring my shoulders, projecting the exact posture I use when briefing 4-star generals inside the secure walls of the Pentagon. The shift in my demeanor is immediate and undeniable. The aura of a helpless, defeated civilian evaporates entirely, replaced by the cold, calculated presence of a high-ranking federal intelligence director. Judge Sterling narrows his eyes, sensing the sudden change in the atmosphere. The pity in his gaze vanishes, replaced by sharp, focused attention. He realizes, perhaps for the first time today, that the woman standing before him is not acting like a cornered thief. She is acting like someone who owns the room. Your Honor, I say, my voice steady, clear, and devoid of any emotion. It rings out across the silent courtroom, striking the walls with absolute certainty. The defense does not wish to offer a statement of apology. We do not wish to ask for leniency, nor do we intend to contest the origin of the funds my father so graciously highlighted in his testimony. A confused murmur ripples through the gallery. Chloe whispers something frantic to Trent. My father's brow furrows, his facade of grief slipping for a fraction of a second as he tries to process my words. Why is she not begging? Why is she agreeing with the premise? However, I continue letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure every single person in the room is hanging on my next breath. The defense does have one final piece of evidence to submit to this court. A document that will not only clarify the exact nature of these financial transactions, but will entirely redefine the jurisdiction of this proceeding. I turn my head slightly to the left, looking down at Kenneth. My high-priced former federal prosecutor, currently playing the role of a modest defense attorney, is already unfastening the brass clasps of his worn leather briefcase. I give him a single, barely perceptible nod. It is the signal. The green light to drop the bomb. The authorization to unleash the full devastating weight of the United States government directly onto my father's lap. Kenneth stands up, his entire posture transforming just as mine did. He reaches into the dark interior of his briefcase, his hand bypassing the standard legal pads and civil motion forms. He pulls out something that does not belong in a standard civil dispute over a family trust fund. The courtroom holds its breath as Kenneth turns toward the bench, ready to deliver the instrument of their total destruction. Kenneth steps out from behind our defense table. He does not carry a standard manila folder or a plastic binder filled with printed bank statements. He carries a single thick ivory envelope. It is made of heavy tamper-proof security paper. Along the back flap sit two distinct drops of melted crimson wax, bearing official impressions that command immediate silent respect. On the front of the envelope, stamped in crisp, unyielding ink, are the unmistakable seals of the United States Department of Defense and the United States Department of the Treasury. The atmosphere in this room shifts the instant the envelope becomes visible. A federal courtroom operates on a very specific hierarchy of paperwork. Everyone present, from the court clerk to the armed bailiffs, recognizes the visual language of absolute federal authority. The ambient noise in the gallery completely evaporates. The low hum of whispered insults from my family dies instantly. Kenneth walks towards the bench with measured, deliberate steps. He bypasses the plaintiff table entirely. My father Marcus watches him pass. The mask of the grieving widower cracks just a fraction. He leans over to his high-priced lawyer, David Pierce. He whispers something urgent. Pierce does not respond to my father. Pierce is staring directly at the crimson seals on the envelope. The arrogant smirk that Pierce wore throughout his entire opening statement melts right off his face. Pierce has spent decades defending white-collar criminals. He knows exactly what a joint agency federal indictment looks like. Trent leans forward in his wooden pew. He squints his blue eyes, trying to make out the insignia from the front row of the gallery. He adjusts his suit jacket, but his hands suddenly look stiff. He is a hedge fund director who spends his life exploiting legal loopholes. But even Trent knows that you do not bring military and treasury documents to a local civil dispute over a dead woman's trust fund. Chloe sits frozen beside him, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the harsh fluorescent light. She looks at her husband for reassurance, but Trent is entirely focused on the envelope. He finally realizes that the game he thought he was playing has just been violently overturned. Kenneth approaches the elevated mahogany bench. The bailiff instinctively takes a half step forward, recognizing that classified materials are being introduced into a public space. Your Honor, Kenneth says, his voice dropping the mild-mannered public defender act he had maintained all morning. He speaks with the sharp, commanding cadence of a man who used to put international cartels behind bars. The defense formally submits this sealed dossier for your immediate private review. It contains classified declarations from the Director of National Intelligence and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Kenneth extends his hand. The court clerk takes the envelope, holding it carefully by the edges as if it might detonate. She passes it up to Judge Sterling. We respectfully request that the court review these findings before issuing any rulings regarding the assets of Beatrice Williams. Kenneth continues, standing perfectly straight. The contents of this envelope directly supersede the jurisdiction of this civil court and fundamentally alter the nature of the plaintiff's fabricated claims. Pierce jumps up from his chair. His chair scrapes loudly against the floor. Objection, Your Honor! Pierce shouts, his voice pitching higher than before. "This is highly irregular. The defense cannot introduce undisclosed documents at the 11th hour. We have a right to review any evidence submitted against my client." Judge Sterling holds up a single hand, silencing the aggressive lawyer instantly. The judge looks down at the ivory envelope resting on his desk. He stares at the red wax seals. He stares at the Department of Defense crest. The air conditioning kicks on, humming softly in the background. It is the only sound in the entire room. Judge Sterling reaches into his robe and pulls out his reading glasses. He slides them onto his face. He picks up a silver letter opener from his desk. He slides the blade beneath the wax seals, breaking them with a sharp tearing sound that echoes off the wood-paneled walls. He pulls out a thick stack of documents printed on heavily watermarked federal security paper. As the judge begins to read, his posture changes. The slight lean of a magistrate humoring a family dispute completely vanishes. His spine goes rigid, his shoulders lock into place. His eyes dart rapidly back and forth across the top page. He flips to the second page, then the third. The heavy gold ring on his finger flashes under the lights as he grips the paper. My father grips the edge of his table. The knuckles on his dark hands turn a pale ashy gray. He looks at me. I do not blink. I look right back at him, offering absolutely nothing but cold, steady silence. He suddenly looks very small. The custom-tailored morning suit he is wearing suddenly looks like a costume he put on for a play that has just been canceled. He realizes that the daughter he tried to bury has just handed the judge a shovel. Judge Sterling finishes reading the first section of the dossier. He slowly lowers the documents back to his desk. He takes off his reading glasses. He does not look at my father. He does not look at the high-priced lawyers. He looks directly at the armed bailiff standing by the double doors at the back of the room. "Lock the doors," Judge Sterling commands, his voice echoing with a terrifying finality. "Nobody leaves this courtroom." The heavy brass lock on the main double doors clicks into place. It is a sharp metallic sound that seals the room like a vault. The armed bailiff steps squarely in front of the exit, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. Panic instantly ripples through the gallery. My extended family members, who were whispering insults just moments ago, suddenly press their backs against the wooden pews. They realize they are no longer spectators at a family drama. They are witnesses in a locked-down federal crime scene. Trent leaps to his feet. His bespoke Navy suit suddenly looks restrictive as he frantically looks from the locked doors back to the bench. He opens his mouth to demand an explanation, but the heavy glare of the bailiff forces him to slowly sit back down. Chloe grabs his arm, her long manicured nails digging into his sleeve. For the first time in her pampered life, she looks genuinely terrified. At the plaintiff table, my father Marcus is completely frozen. He turns to his high-priced lawyer David Pierce, seeking a lifeline. But Pierce has physically distanced himself, sliding his chair a few inches away from my father. Pierce knows the cardinal rule of federal court. When the Department of Defense locks the doors, you stop talking, and you start praying. Judge Sterling picks up the top sheet of the classified dossier. He smooths the heavy watermarked paper flat against his mahogany desk. He looks directly at David Pierce, his voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. "Counselor, the judge says the civil suit brought forth by your client regarding the estate of Beatrice Williams is hereby dismissed with prejudice, effective immediately." Pierce swallows hard. He nods slowly, accepting the defeat without a single word of protest. He knows better than to argue with a classified directive. But my father does not know better. His massive ego simply cannot comprehend the reality of his situation. "But, Your Honor?" Marcus stammers, his voice cracking under the strain. "You have not even heard our full argument. We have the bank records. We have proof she is unemployed. She is a parasite trying to steal her mother's legacy." Judge Sterling slams his hand flat against the bench. The sound cracks like a gunshot, forcing my father to recoil in his chair. "You will remain silent, Mr. Williams," the judge commands, his tone dropping to a dangerous baritone. "You have stood in my courtroom and perjured yourself for the last hour. You have spun a fabricated narrative about a lazy, unmotivated daughter. You claimed she has not worked a single day since graduating from Spelman College. You claimed she is a financial burden who contributes nothing to society. The judge lifts the classified document, holding it up for the entire room to see. The red treasury seals are highly visible from the gallery. Let the official court record reflect the absolute truth regarding the defendant, Judge Sterling announces, projecting his voice so every single relative sitting in the back row can hear clearly. The woman you attempted to humiliate today is not unemployed. She is not a parasite. Naomi Williams is currently serving as a senior cyber data analytics director for the United States Department of Defense. The words drop into the silent courtroom like a string of heavy anvils. A collective gasp erupts from my aunts and uncles. Chloe covers her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with total disbelief. She shakes her head furiously, unable to process the reality of the situation. Chloe suddenly stands up from the gallery. She cannot accept this destruction of her worldview. That is a lie, she shrieks, her voice piercing the heavy silence. She is just a dropout. She does not work for the Pentagon. The bailiff immediately steps toward the wooden partition, his hand raised in a clear warning. Judge Sterling glares at my sister with an intensity that could melt steel. Sit down and remain silent, young woman, or you will be placed in holding for contempt of a federal court. Chloe drops back into the pew, her face crumbling as the absolute authority of the room crushes her vanity. Judge Sterling returns his attention to the classified dossier. He reads further down the page, his voice steady and unrelenting. Furthermore, the judge continues, she holds a Tier 1 top secret, sensitive compartmented information clearance. She operates at the absolute highest levels of federal intelligence. Her daily responsibilities involve dismantling international cyberterrorism and tracking illicit global financial networks. The work she does is so highly classified that her employment records, her income, and her residential data are intentionally masked by the United States government for her own physical protection. I watch Trent as the judge speaks. The arrogant smirk is completely gone. The blood drains entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, sickly ghost. His blue eyes are blown wide with sheer, absolute terror. Trent is a hedge fund director who moves dirty money for a living. He understands exactly what a senior cyber data analytics director does. He realizes in real time that he has not just been insulting his sister-in-law. He has been insulting the exact federal agent authorized to hunt down men like him. My father grips the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. But she lives in a cheap apartment. Marcus stammers desperately, trying to hold on to his shattered illusion. She does not have any money. Her checking accounts are empty. I saw the civilian credit reports myself. Your civilian credit reports are meaningless, Judge Sterling fires back, dripping with disgust. Director Williams does not utilize standard commercial banking institutions because her financial footprint is secured by federal intelligence credit unions. Her modest living arrangements are a mandated security protocol, not a sign of poverty. You mistook a highly trained operative maintaining a low profile for a woman who had failed at life. You looked at a decorated public servant and saw an easy target for your own financial greed. I maintain my perfect posture at the defense table. I do not smile. I do not gloat. I let the overwhelming weight of my true identity crush them organically. For a decade, I sat quietly at Sunday dinners while they mocked my career choices. I listened to them brag about their luxury cars, their vanity brands, and their country club memberships. I let them believe they were the pinnacle of excellence while I was secretly protecting the national security of the country. Judge Sterling takes a deep breath, his dark eyes burning with righteous fury. He looks directly at my father, stripping away the last remaining shreds of his dignity. You spoke earlier of black excellence, Mr. Williams, the judge says, shaking his head slowly. You claimed your daughter was a stain on your family legacy. You told this court she brought zero value to your bloodline, yet she is the one serving her country, operating at the pinnacle of her field, protecting the infrastructure of this nation. Meanwhile, you sit here relying on cheap forgery and deceit to rob your own flesh and blood. The judge pauses, letting the absolute horror of the situation wash over the plaintiff table. He leans forward, resting his forearms on the mahogany wood. You brought a highly classified federal director into a public civil court. Mr. Williams, the judge says, his voice echoing with absolute finality. You hired criminals to forge international banking records, and you officially submitted those fabricated documents into the federal record in an attempt to frame a United States intelligence officer. You thought you could use the justice system as a weapon to steal your late wife's trust fund. Instead, you have forced the Department of Defense and the Department of the Treasury to intervene directly to protect one of their most valuable senior assets. The entire courtroom is completely paralyzed. My father sits frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly open, unable to form a single coherent word. The man who spent his entire life controlling the narrative is now completely speechless. Director Williams did not steal $5 million from her mother's estate. Judge Sterling concludes, tapping his finger against the ivory envelope. And the documents you submitted as Exhibit A have just provided the federal government with everything they need to prove exactly who did. Trent is physically shaking in the front row of the gallery, realizing that the fake Cayman Islands routing numbers he purchased are now in the hands of the exact woman who builds the algorithms to track them. They thought they were the predators in this room. They thought they had backed a helpless animal into a corner. They are finally realizing they walked directly into a cage, locked the door from the inside, and handed the key to the apex predator. Judge Sterling picks up the heavy, glossy binder that my father's lawyer so proudly submitted just 20 minutes ago. He holds it by the spine, letting the sheer weight of the fabricated evidence hang in the air. The gold lettering on the cover flashes under the courtroom lights. This binder was supposed to be my coffin. It was supposed to be the indisputable proof that I was a parasite draining my family dry. Now it is a radioactive explosive device ticking down to 0, right on the judge's mahogany desk. Let us review the exact contents of Plaintiff Exhibit A. Judge Sterling says, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. You presented this court with a highly detailed digital pathway. You claimed these documents proved your daughter moved $5 million of her late mother's trust fund through a holding firm in Delaware, bounced it to a corporate proxy in Cyprus, and finally parked it in a private Cayman Islands account. You testified under penalty of perjury that these records were accurate. You authenticated them under oath. My father tries to swallow, but his throat is completely dry. He looks at his lawyer, David Pierce. Pierce is staring straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact. Pierce knows that the moment a client commits perjury involving federal security interests, attorney-client privilege becomes a very fragile shield. You paid a significant amount of money to a black market contractor to fabricate these routing numbers. Mr. Williams, the judge, continues reading directly from the classified Treasury report. You and your son-in-law needed a plausible digital trail to frame Director Williams. You wanted to make her look like a sophisticated thief to cover up your own embezzlement. But you are not cyber experts. You are just arrogant men blinded by greed. The judge turns his piercing gaze toward the front row of the gallery, locking eyes directly with Trent. Trent shrinks back against the hard wooden pew. The wealthy hedge fund director who threw a crumpled $100 bill at my feet and told me to call an Uber is now physically trembling. Sweat is beading on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. When you purchase offshore shell company credentials on the dark web to launder stolen money, Judge Sterling says, addressing Trent directly, you run a very severe risk. You assume you are buying untraceable phantom accounts, but because you operate with the absolute hubris of a man who believes the rules do not apply to him, you failed to run a basic federal compliance check on the holding companies you selected. I watch Trent's chest heave as he struggles to draw breath. He realizes exactly where this is going. He realizes that the invisible algorithms he mocked are real, and they have him locked in a targeting reticle. The specific routing numbers you submitted in this binder, Judge Sterling announces, his voice echoing like thunder, do not belong to a harmless tax evasion shelter. By an act of pure, catastrophic coincidence, the fake account architecture you purchased perfectly mirrors a flagged financial network, currently under active investigation by the United States Armed Forces. The holding company in Cyprus you used to wash Beatrice Williams' life savings is a confirmed financial proxy for an international syndicate actively sanctioned by the Pentagon for global weapons trafficking. A collective gasp rips through the courtroom. My aunts and uncles in the back rows cover their mouths in absolute horror. This is no longer a scandalous family dispute about missing money. This is a nightmare involving international terrorists. Chloe grabs Trent's arm violently, shaking him. "Trent, what is he talking about?" She hisses, her voice shrill with rising panic. "Tell him he is wrong. Tell him we just moved the money to a private fund." Trent cannot speak. His jaw is locked in pure terror. He knows the judge is not wrong. He knows that in his rush to hide the $5 million he stole from a dead woman, he bypassed standard banking protocols and utilized illicit channels. He thought he was being a financial genius. He thought he was outsmarting the system. Instead, he accidentally wired $5 million of clean American capital directly into a network monitored by federal counterintelligence. My father, Marcus, suddenly stands up, gripping the edge of the plaintiff table. His entire body is shaking. "Your Honor," he pleads, his voice stripped of all its commanding baritone. "We did not know. I swear to you, we had absolutely no idea who owned those accounts. Trent handled the digital transfers. He told me it was a secure, high-yield investment portfolio to protect the family wealth. I just signed the executor authorizations. I did not know where the money was actually going." In less than 3 minutes, the unbreakable alliance of black excellence and corporate supremacy has completely fractured. Marcus instantly throws his white son-in-law under the bus to save his own skin. The wealthy patriarch who spent his life projecting ultimate power is now begging and pointing fingers like a cornered rat. Trent leaps out of his pew in the gallery, his face turning a mottled purplish red. "That is a lie," he screams, pointing back at my father. "He knew exactly what we were doing. He authorized the offshore restructuring because he wanted to hide the assets from the IRS before the probate closed. He gave me the access codes. He is the executor. Sit down and remain silent." Judge Sterling roars, striking his gavel with such force that the sound cracks through the room like a whip. The armed bailiff steps instantly toward the gallery, placing his hand firmly on his holstered weapon. Trent freezes his hands raised defensively and slowly sinks back into the wooden bench beside a sobbing Chloe. The judge glares at the two men, his disgust practically radiating off the bench. "It does not matter which one of you pressed the final key," the judge states coldly. "You conspired to defraud an estate. You stole $5 million from a deceased woman. And in your efforts to conceal your theft and frame an innocent public servant, you funneled American currency into a hostile foreign syndicate." Judge Sterling picks up the sealed envelope from the Department of Defense. He holds it up for them to see. "Ignorance is not a defense when you fund enemies of the state," the judge declares. "Under the United States Code, your actions transcend standard financial fraud. By knowingly or recklessly utilizing sanctioned proxy networks to move capital, you have triggered the provisions of the Espionage Act. You have provided material financial support to organizations actively working against the national security interests of the United States." The words Espionage Act drop the ambient temperature of the courtroom to absolute zero. This is a charge that carries decades in federal prison. It is a charge that completely vaporizes wealth, seizes all property, and destroys a family name for generations. And the most astonishing part of this entire spectacle, Judge Sterling continues shaking his head in sheer disbelief, is that the federal government did not have to spend a single dollar hunting you down. Director Williams did not have to file a single subpoena to expose your operation. You did all the heavy lifting yourselves. The judge tosses the glossy binder back onto his desk. It lands with a heavy final thud. "You walked into a federal courthouse of your own free will," the judge says, staring directly at my father. "You paid for the forged evidence. You organized it into this neat little binder. You demanded a hearing. You sat in that witness box under oath, and you demanded that this court review your financial transactions. You literally handed the United States government a signed, notarized confession to international money laundering and wire fraud. You built a perfect trap for yourselves, walked right inside, locked the door, and handed the key to the exact federal intelligence director you were trying to destroy." My father collapses backward into his chair. His legs can no longer support his weight. He stares at the glossy binder on the judge's desk as if it is a venomous snake. The realization of his absolute stupidity crushes whatever fight he had left in him. He spent years telling me I was a failure because I did not want to join his cutthroat corporate world. He mocked my quiet life. He mocked my lack of flashy cars and designer clothes. He truly believed he was the smartest man alive. Now he realizes that while he was busy playing real estate mogul and manipulating country club politics, I was mastering the architecture of global cyber warfare. He realizes that I let him bring that binder to court today. I let him perjure himself. I sat here in silence and watched him confidently execute his own professional and personal suicide. Chloe is hyperventilating in the gallery. Her perfect makeup is completely ruined by streaks of mascara. She's staring at her diamond tennis bracelet, the one she bought with my mother's stolen money. She finally understands that the jewelry on her wrist, the designer clothes in her closet, and the luxury cars in her driveway are all classified as the proceeds of federal treason. Her vanity lifestyle brand is dead. Her country club status is erased. She is going to leave this building as the wife of a federal criminal and the daughter of a disgraced fraudster. I remain perfectly still at the defense table. Kenneth, my lawyer, writes a single brief note on his legal pad and slides it toward me. The note says checkmate. I do not smile, but a deep, profound sense of peace settles into my bones. I did not have to scream. I did not have to engage in a toxic shouting match at the dinner table. I did not have to beg for my relatives to see my worth. I simply stepped out of their way and let the sheer momentum of their own arrogance carry them right off a cliff. Judge Sterling gathers the classified documents and places them carefully back inside the ivory envelope. He looks toward the back of the courtroom directly at the heavy locked oak doors. The trap is completely sealed. The evidence has been officially entered into the federal record. The only thing left to do is collect the bodies. Judge Sterling nods to the back of the courtroom. The signal is subtle, just a slight dip of his chin, but the response is instantaneous. 2 men and 1 woman who have been sitting quietly in the 3rd row of the gallery suddenly stand up. For the past 2 hours, my extended family assumed these individuals were just anonymous court observers or perhaps junior clerks. They blended in perfectly, wearing unremarkable business suits, sitting with their arms crossed, watching the proceedings with mild interest. They are not court observers. They are special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation specifically attached to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. The lead agent, a tall, black woman with a sharp, uncompromising gaze, steps past my stunned aunts and uncles. She reaches into her tailored blazer and pulls out a leather badge holder, letting it flip open to reveal a heavy gold shield. The silver handcuffs clipped to her belt clink softly as she walks down the central aisle. The 2 male agents flank her, moving with the synchronized predatory grace of a tactical unit closing in on a target. Trent scrambles backward in his wooden pew, pressing his spine against the hard backrest, as if he can somehow merge with the wood and disappear. The arrogance that defined his entire existence has evaporated. He looks like a cornered animal. His mouth opens and closes, but no sound comes out. He realizes that all his wealth, his country club memberships, and his Ivy League degrees cannot stop the federal agents walking toward him. Trenton Vance, the lead agent, announces, her voice slicing through the terrified silence of the gallery. You are under arrest for violation of the Espionage Act, international wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Trent does not move. His brain has completely short-circuited. The male agent steps into the row, grabs Trent by the bicep, and hauls him to his feet with effortless strength. Trent stumbles, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping on the polished floor. The agent spins him around, pinning his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs locking around Trent's wrists echoes loudly across the room. Chloe snaps out of her paralyzed state. The reality of the cold steel clicking around her husband's wrists finally breaks through her delusion. She lunges forward, grabbing the sleeve of the FBI agent. "You cannot do this!" Chloe screams, her voice cracking into a hysterical, high-pitched shriek. "He is a hedge fund director. Do you know who we are? We have lawyers. You are making a massive mistake." The lead agent does not even blink. She steps between Chloe and Trent, using her physical presence to force my sister back. Mom, step away from the suspect immediately, or you will be charged with obstructing a federal officer. Chloe recoils as if she has been slapped. She looks at Trent, expecting him to assert his power to bark legal threats to do something to fix this. But Trent is weeping. Actual tears are streaming down his pale face, dripping onto the lapel of his bespoke navy suit. The white savior who was supposed to elevate our family to new heights of corporate supremacy is sobbing uncontrollably as an agent recites his Miranda rights. At the plaintiff table, my father Marcus has not moved an inch. He sits frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the mahogany surface. The second male agent approaches him, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. Marcus Williams, the agent says, his tone strictly business. Stand up. My father slowly raises his head. He looks around the courtroom, his eyes darting frantically from the locked double doors to the judge and finally to me. The facade of the powerful, untouchable patriarch is completely gone. He looks like a tired, broken old man who just realized he gambled his entire life away on a rigged table. Naomi, my father whispers, his voice shaking with absolute desperation. Please, I am your father. You cannot let them do this to me. We are family. I stand perfectly still at the defense table. I look at him, but I feel absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, no satisfaction. Just the profound, empty silence of a severed bond. You stopped being my father the moment you decided my mother's legacy was just another asset to liquidate. I reply, my voice carrying clearly across the room. And you stopped being family the night you threw me out on the street to protect your own theft. The agent pulls Marcus to his feet. My father does not resist. He holds his hands out in front of him, surrendering completely to the inevitable. The handcuffs snap shut around his wrists, locking him into a nightmare of his own creation. Chloe's breakdown escalates from panic to absolute madness. She realizes that both the men who funded her luxurious, vanity-driven life are being hauled away to federal prison. She realizes her bank accounts are frozen, her properties will be seized, and her social status is permanently annihilated. She drops to her knees in the middle of the gallery, sobbing hysterically, her perfect designer dress pooling around her on the dirty floor. She is screaming for someone, anyone, to help her. But our extended family members simply pull away from her, horrified by the radioactive fallout of this scandal. Aunts and uncles who praised her just hours ago now physically turn their backs, terrified of being associated with federal treason. Kenneth, my lawyer, quietly closes his briefcase and clicks the brass locks into place. He gives me a respectful nod, acknowledging that our work here is officially done. I gather my encrypted phone and my single pen. I do not need to wait for a formal dismissal. The civil case is dead, and the criminal process has already begun. I step out from behind the defense table. I walk slowly down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy silence returns, broken only by Chloe's ragged sobbing and the heavy footsteps of the federal agents leading Marcus and Trent toward the holding cells. As I approach the gallery, the FBI agents pause, allowing me to pass. Trent and my father are standing right in front of me, their hands bound in steel. Trent looks at the floor, too humiliated to meet my gaze. My father looks at me with eyes full of desperate, unearned expectation, still hoping for some miraculous display of daughterly mercy. I stop walking. I stand inches away from the men who spent years trying to convince me I was worthless. I look at my father, then at Trent, and finally at Chloe, who is looking up at me from the floor with mascara streaking down her cheeks. I lean in close, lowering my voice so that only the three of them can hear my final words. You wanted to build generational wealth? I whisper, my tone sharp as a razor blade, cold and completely devoid of mercy. Congratulations. You just secured a 20-year federal lease and the taxpayers are covering your rent. My father closes his eyes, a single tear escaping, as the absolute finality of my words crushes his soul. Trent lets out a pathetic whimper, his entire body trembling under the weight of his own destruction. Chloe buries her face in her hands, wailing into the empty space of the courtroom. I do not stay to watch them break completely. I straighten my posture, adjust the lapel of my emerald suit, and walk purposefully toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. The bailiff unlocks the doors, pulling them open to let me out. I step through the threshold into the bright, sunlit corridor of the federal courthouse, leaving the toxic remnants of my family behind in the dark. The heavy doors swing shut behind me with a loud, resounding thud, locking the criminals inside. The trial of the decade ends in absolute earth-shattering shock, leaving a legacy of greed completely dismantled by the quiet daughter they never bothered to understand. The fallout from the federal indictment did not just make the local evening news. It dominated the national financial circuits for 6 consecutive weeks. The media completely dismantled the carefully curated facade of my father's real estate empire. Every major news network ran segments on how a prominent local patriarch and a wealthy hedge fund director conspired to steal from a dead woman and accidentally funded an international terror syndicate. The federal justice system moves with terrifying speed when national security is involved. There were no lengthy appeals or drawn-out plea negotiations. The evidence I handed over in that classified dossier was absolute. Trent tried to turn state evidence against my father, hoping to secure a reduced sentence by offering to expose other corrupt real estate deals. My father attempted the exact same strategy, claiming Trent was the mastermind who manipulated an aging widower. The federal prosecutors declined both of their offers. They did not need any cooperation because I had already provided them with the complete digital architecture of their entire criminal enterprise. Judge Sterling presided over their sentencing hearing exactly 2 months later. He did not mince words. He stripped them of their dignity, their titles, and their freedom. Marcus and Trent were both sentenced to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. The men who had spent their lives dining in exclusive country clubs and looking down on the working class were immediately transferred to a maximum security federal penitentiary. They traded their bespoke, tailored suits for standard-issue bright orange jumpsuits. They will spend the next 2 decades in a concrete cell stripped of the generational wealth they tried so ruthlessly to control. Chloe's downfall was perhaps the most poetic justice of all. The federal government does not just arrest the perpetrators of international wire fraud, they execute complete asset forfeiture. Everything purchased with illicit funds was immediately seized by the United States Marshals Service. Federal agents arrived at her stolen mansion on a Tuesday morning. They did not knock politely. They seized the property, the luxury vehicles in the driveway, and the designer furniture inside the house. They literally stood in her grand foyer and ordered her to hand over the diamond tennis bracelet right off her wrist because it was classified as the proceeds of a federal crime. Chloe was left with absolutely nothing. Her vanity lifestyle brand collapsed overnight when her offshore accounts were frozen. The elite social circles she had catered to her entire life instantly excommunicated her. The wealthy friends who had praised her fake success refused to return her phone calls, terrified that associating with her would trigger a federal audit of their own finances. She was forced to move into a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. She had to take a minimum wage job as a retail associate just to pay her basic utility bills. The golden child who had mocked my modest lifestyle, who had stood in a federal courtroom and called me a lazy parasite, was now living the exact reality she had used to humiliate me. She has to ride the public bus to work every single day because she can no longer afford to call an Uber. With the toxic elements of my family completely removed from society, I expected the dust to settle. I expected to quietly return to my classified work at the Pentagon and leave the past behind me. But the universe had one final revelation waiting for me. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Kenneth requested a private meeting. We did not meet in a courtroom or a coffee shop. He asked me to meet him at a highly secure private banking facility in the historic district of the city. When I arrived, Kenneth led me into a polished steel viewing room deep inside the subterranean vault. He did not have his standard legal briefcase. He held a small, beautifully carved wooden box and a single sealed envelope. "I did not want to present this to you until the criminal trial was completely resolved," Kenneth said, his voice softer and much more personal than his usual sharp legal tone. "I promised your mother I would wait until you were entirely safe from your father." I stared at the wooden box. My heart, which had remained perfectly steady while facing down federal judges and armed agents, suddenly began to race. "Your mother came to me privately about 6 months before she passed away. Kenneth explained, sliding the envelope across the metal table. She knew she was dying. But more importantly, she knew exactly who her husband was. Beatrice was fully aware that Marcus was a financial predator. She knew he was bleeding the family accounts dry, and she highly suspected he would try to steal whatever she left behind for you. I reached out and picked up the envelope. It bore my name written in my mother's unmistakable, sharp, aggressive handwriting. She could not confront him legally while she was sick. Kenneth continued. She knew Marcus would tie her up in court and make her final days a living hell. She also knew that if she openly gave you a massive inheritance, Marcus would paint a target on your back. So she beat him at his own game. She allowed him to believe he had control over the primary estate. She let him focus all his greed on the visible trust fund. Meanwhile, she quietly liquidated her most valuable, untouchable assets. Vintage art collections, untraceable municipal bonds, and inherited properties from her own grandparents. She consolidated all of it into an irrevocable blind trust completely invisible to Marcus and Trent. Kenneth tapped the carved wooden box. That trust is solely in your name, Naomi. It is clean, legally protected, and entirely yours. Your mother ensured that your father could never touch a single cent of her true legacy. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the thick parchment paper inside. The letter was dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Naomi. The letter began, "If you are reading this, Kenneth has kept his promise, and your father has finally shown his true colors. I am writing this to tell you everything I could not say out loud while I was still trapped in that house." I read the words, and my vision immediately blurred with hot tears. "I know Marcus and Chloe made your life miserable," Beatrice wrote. "I know they mocked you for your choices and tried to make you feel inferior. I stayed quiet because I was trying to protect the peace, but my silence was a failure of motherhood. I should have defended you. I should have told them that they were blind to the incredible woman you had become." I wiped a tear from my cheek, my hands trembling slightly as I continued reading the delicate script. "You thought you were hiding your true life from me," Beatrice continued. "You thought I believed the cover story about your simple data entry job. But a mother always knows when her daughter is carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I saw the encrypted phones, Naomi. I noticed the specific security protocols you used when you visited the house. I saw the way you scanned a room assessing threats with the precision of a soldier. I did not know the exact details of your employment, but I knew you were serving a purpose far greater than anything Marcus could ever comprehend." A sob escaped my throat, echoing in the quiet steel vault. For 10 years I had carried the burden of my classified identity completely alone. I thought my mother died believing I was exactly what my father claimed I was. I thought she passed away feeling disappointed in her eldest daughter. "I am so incredibly proud of you," my mother wrote, the ink pressing deeply into the paper. "You refused to participate in the shallow, performative greed that consumed this family. You chose a life of quiet sacrifice and honor. You protected people who will never even know your name. You embodied the true definition of excellence, while your father and sister chased empty validation." I placed my hand flat against the letter, absorbing the profound warmth radiating from her words. "I have left you the true fruits of my labor," Beatrice concluded. "Use this wealth to build a life that brings you peace. Do not look back at the people who tried to break you. You have already won, Naomi. You won the moment you decided to be exactly who you are. I love you infinitely, Mom." I carefully folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. The heavy, suffocating armor I had worn for the last decade finally cracked and fell away. I had spent my entire adult life bracing for impact, preparing for betrayal, and fighting a silent war against my own blood. But sitting in that underground vault, holding the undeniable proof of my mother's absolute love, I realized the war was genuinely over. Kenneth quietly opened the carved wooden box. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was a stack of certified ownership deeds, bank routing devices, and the primary access key to a new financial empire. It was not money tainted by fraud or blood. It was a pure, untarnished legacy of love and protection. "Take your time," Kenneth said softly, stepping back toward the door of the viewing room to give me privacy. "You have earned every single second of this peace." I sat alone in the vault, surrounded by the quiet hum of the security systems. The men who had tried to bury me were currently sitting in concrete cells, stripped of their names and reduced to federal inmate numbers. The sister who had mocked my existence was currently bagging groceries just to survive. They had engineered their own flawless destruction through pure, unfiltered arrogance. But I had not just survived their trap. I had been protected all along by the quiet, fierce love of a mother who saw through the deception. I looked down at the wooden box and smiled a genuine, radiant smile. The darkness of my past was completely sealed away, leaving nothing but a vast, unwritten future completely under my control. I am sitting in the center of my penthouse living room. The evening sun is slowly dipping below the city skyline, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The space around me is designed in deep emerald greens and rich gold accents, reflecting a quiet, enduring wealth that does not need to announce itself to the world. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I can see the financial district. It is the same district where Trent used to strut around in his bespoke suits, believing he owned the very air he breathed. Now he is sitting in a federal penitentiary cell where the lights never truly turn off, and the doors are made of reinforced steel. I hold a delicate porcelain teacup in my hands. The warmth radiates through my palms. It is a rare Earl Grey blend, the exact kind my mother Beatrice used to drink when she wanted a moment of absolute peace away from my father's relentless ambition. I take a slow, deliberate sip. The steam curls upward, dissipating into the quiet, conditioned air of the apartment. There is a profound, beautiful silence in this room. It is the kind of silence you only achieve after you have surgically removed every toxic element from your life. For 34 years, my existence was defined by noise. The noise of my father's constant criticism, the noise of Chloe's vicious mocking, the noise of Trent's insufferable arrogance. They filled every room they entered with the overwhelming volume of their own egos. They believed that whoever was the loudest was the most powerful. I set the teacup down on the glass coffee table. The porcelain makes a soft, definitive click against the surface. I look up directly into the camera lens. People always tell you to fight back. When you are being abused, when you are being marginalized, and when your own family treats you like a stepping stone, society tells you to raise your voice. They tell you to scream your truth from the rooftops, to engage in the battle, and to prove your worth to the people who are committed to misunderstanding you. But I am here to tell you that noise is a liability. In the world of federal cyber intelligence, we have a fundamental rule. The loudest signal on the network is always the first one to be targeted, tracked, and destroyed. Real power does not scream. Real power operates in absolute silence. Real power is sitting at a mahogany dining table while your father strips away your inheritance and choosing not to say a single word. My father Marcus spent his entire life crafting an illusion. He weaponized the concept of black excellence, using it as a shield to hide his own predatory greed. He thought his country club memberships and his tailored morning suits made him untouchable. He looked at me, a woman who did not care about designer labels or society galas, and he saw weakness. He mistook my introversion for incompetence. Trent was exactly the same. He looked at a black woman holding a quiet, unassuming posture, and his inherent prejudice told him I was an easy mark. He threw a $100 bill at my feet because his entire worldview was built on the assumption that wealth equals supremacy. He needed to humiliate me to validate his own fragile ego. And Chloe, my golden sister, was so desperate for validation that she was willing to help them bury me just to keep her spot in the limelight. She wanted to destroy me simply because my existence reminded her that her entire life was a shallow performance. They all made the exact same fatal miscalculation. They forgot that you should never interrupt your enemy when they are in the middle of making a catastrophic mistake. I did not have to hire an expensive public relations firm to destroy their reputations. I did not have to engage in a screaming match in the foyer of that stolen mansion. I did not even have to raise a hand against them. I just opened the door, stepped out of the way, and let the sheer blinding momentum of their own arrogance carry them right off a cliff. They wanted to go to federal court, so I let them. They wanted to submit forged documents, so I allowed it. They wanted to brag about their offshore accounts, so I simply recorded the audio. They were so incredibly eager to dig my grave that they did not realize they were standing at the bottom of it, handing me the shovel. To anyone watching this right now who has ever been called a disappointment by the people who were supposed to protect you, listen to me very carefully. When they call you the black sheep, when they tell you that you are a failure because you do not fit into their toxic, narrow definition of success, do not waste your energy trying to convince them otherwise. Do not exhaust your spirit trying to translate your worth to people who do not even speak the language of respect. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe they have the upper hand. Let them construct their elaborate lies and build their fragile empires on foundations of deceit. Your job is not to fix them. Your job is to quietly build your own fortress, secure your own resources, educate yourself, master your craft in the shadows where they cannot see you growing. And when the time comes, when they finally overplay their hand and try to use you as a casualty for their own gain, you will not have to panic. You will not have to beg for mercy. You will just drop the evidence on the table and watch their entire world collapse under the weight of their own actions. Justice is not always loud. The most devastating revenge is a quiet, comprehensive checkmate. I look out at the city skyline one last time. The financial district is completely dark against the night sky, but my penthouse is flooded with warm, steady light. I pick up my teacup, resting my hands comfortably in my lap. I am no longer the girl they threw out into the street. I am the architect of my own destiny, fully backed by the legacy of a mother who loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. I take one final sip of my tea. My posture is perfectly relaxed, but my eyes remain sharp, unyielding, and absolutely victorious. The camera begins to slowly pull back. It glides smoothly across the polished hardwood floor, widening the frame to capture the sheer magnitude of the penthouse. The expensive artwork, the sleek modern furniture, and the breathtaking panoramic view of the city all come into focus. I remain perfectly centered in the frame, a solitary figure of absolute unshakable power sitting in the empire I secured through brilliant silent strategy. The room slowly fades into the shadows as the camera continues its steady retreat. The city lights twinkle in the background, growing smaller and more distant. The screen fades completely to black,